It is a pleasure to have you here. And if you don't know about Card Talk, you should check it out because they have many good tips and recommendations, as Mr. Daugherty could tell you. But I want you to know that I have put the bios of tonight's guests in our chat. They have a lot of big words, so you can read them on your own. But I would like to first thank tonight's sponsors. We have Tracy Humphreys, who is the state chair of ASBDA, Jamie Breen, who is president of NCBA, and Rodney Workman, one of our speakers tonight, is state chair of NBA, and Ruth Peterson, state chair of WBDI. Now, James is very busy. He is the Arts Education and Distance Learning Program Specialist. That's a mouthful. And he's the director of Canon Music Camp. He's been past president of NCBA, NCMEA, and he is the current Southern Division President-elect for NAFME. And Rodney is currently at Asheville High School. And he is also past president of NCBA. And these two fellas got to know each other working together at Central Davidson High School, Middle School. So could you all give them a big welcome and show a little love? And James, I'm calling Click, and Rodney, I'm going to call Clack. And the reason is click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. Sounds like a horse, and Rodney's bringing up the rear. All right, gentlemen, let's get started with our guest tonight. And if you would mute yourself and put your questions in the chat, we would appreciate that. And gentlemen, let's get started with our first question. How important is it to work together as a middle school director and a high school director?
Well, Mr. Workman, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, obviously it's very important, especially if it's a direct feeder type situation where, you know, it's on the same campus or it's close or all the kids are going to the same high school. And a lot of our city school systems, that's not the case, but I'm saying most schools in North Carolina, that is, at least most kids are going to the same high school or there's a semi-direct feeder. And I mean, it's the most important thing. You're not going to have a good high school program ever unless the middle school program is at least functional and hopefully more than that, and sending some kids to the high school program. And when those two people aren't on the same page or don't at least have a good working relationship, it's not gonna go well. So I feel like you really got to be pretty close personally and professionally, and at least have similar goals and be on the same page, or otherwise you're going to have kind of a breakdown along the way.
You know, when Rodney came to Central Davidson, I'd been working with Ricky Harris, who was the band director there before, but I probably hadn't been there every day, but we talked frequently and we worked together. But when Rodney came, when Ricky went in administration, you know, this kind of relationship between us really became stronger between the middle school and high school. And I went back and learned a lot about just teaching again when Rodney came and joined. You know, when I was student teaching, I worked with a middle and high school program together. And this whole thing was supposed to be kind of stories and sharing. So I want to share some things with me that I got better with when working with Rodney and the whole process of coming together. But when I student taught, there was this very systematic with the middle school kids, you know, the method book, and you work in the method book, you go through lines and you know, pass offs and things like that. And I remember just to get kind of down to the details about working, why it's important to work together and how to work together, is even though I had taught for a number of years when Rodney came to Central, you know, when it was time that I had a period and I went and we divided the classes. And I would say, and I know he would agree, that's one of the most important reasons, if you can, that you come together, because a middle school band director cannot possibly teach a room of 50 or 60 clarinets and 20 flutes together and expect any one of those two to get better if they're having to do both in the same room in those first few weeks. So we made sure that I had a period that coincided with the very beginning of sixth grade band so we could work together. Well, as I was preparing to go back and really take a whole group of beginners that I had not done anything with my help, but I wasn't actually responsible for teaching them, I talked to Rodney and I was like, well, I was terrible at flute and I don't know that I'm good at clarinet. And he had one in each hand and he said, well, pick one, and flute was not my thing. So I chose clarinet. And I remember I called W.C. Lanning and I said, look, I got to have a lesson on clarinet. Like I don't know anything. And so, he started telling me some stuff and I said, no. I mean, like they walk in the room, what do I do first? And I want to know. And that was very helpful for me because I just sat back down like he was teaching me in beginning camp. And, but the biggest thing I remember about working together as a high school director, going back to helping the middle school, was I had this concept in my head that, helping Rodney at the middle school was going to be, I had a group of kids and we were, after a couple of days, we were in the method book starting on line 1. And he was like, no, we're not using the method book. I said, never? He said, not yet. And I said, well, when are we going to use it? He said, well, when we're ready. And I'm like, well, when's that going to be? He said, well, you'll know. I was just like, I didn't understand, what I got to do. And through that whole process, we focused on tonguing and sound quality. And I remember, and you probably remember this, Rodney, after a couple of days, I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I think we're ready for the method book. And he said, well, make up stuff. So there was a whole lot of making up songs and patterns and things, but I had no idea. I'd never done that before till I worked with him, but I completely understand that now because it's so critical that they make a good sound and they tongue well, and you just have to do it in so many different ways. You want to throw anything in about that? But I mean, I'm just going back and remembering what I learned as a high school band director that I didn't really ever think about.
Well, I think there was a question about when to start in the method book. I mean, people do it differently. If you're starting a full band class, you pretty much have to start in the method book because it's going to be chaos otherwise. But, I always wanted to teach and still do the Texas way of there's an instrument in the room and that's it. And your job is to teach that instrument. And so for me, I always felt like it was really important that they be able to tongue correctly, have the embouchure form correctly, make a really good sound, be able to tap their toe in time, and do all of that together before they ever read line 1. So that then when you started line 1, you weren't starting with chaos and wrong tonguing and bad sounds. And again, if you're starting a room full of kids with mixed instruments, that's a lot harder to do. The method book is the way that you can kind of get everybody on the same page. But if you're lucky enough to have at least an instrument class, if not a woodwind class, I feel like that's a better method. I don't know where I figured that out or why I thought that, and I never really told people that until Cheryl Floyd said that's the way they did it as well. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm not dumb. So I must be doing the right thing. But it just always made sense to me that how are they ever going to read in this book and play hot cross buns if they can't tongue and tap a toe in time and produce a good sound, which is a whole lot. That is 3 weeks worth of work if you're really checking it. And I always separated the reading from the playing so that when we finally put them together, they knew how to read and they knew how to play. And then we just used the method book to sort of synthesize it and get through it. So the first day we'd read the method book, we may read 10, 12 lines, the very first time, because they could already do the physical part of it. That's my philosophy on that. I don't know about other people, but that's the way I like to do it.
Well, and working with you taught me so much about that because I just not thought about that. And I dare say that most of us that teach high school primarily don't, the longer we've been in high school, we don't go back and think about the elements that have to go into basic playing. And it's really good and refreshing to go back and do that because my ears, every time I went back to the high school, heard things I had not been hearing because of things I was helping to teach beginners with. Like I can't even count the number of times that I thought about problems that were coming from the sounds in the high school kids at that time, because of the things that maybe they missed when they were in middle school, that I was discovering how to teach better just because I was only listening to what they sounded like. So I think that, to Ruth, to the question, I think where possible, it's just so critical that you have that relationship. And of course, I know many people, particularly people in an urban setting, have multiple feeder schools that are coming in, and it's not as easy to do that if you don't have one middle school, one high school, or two, and that kind of thing. But I know my whole perspective was changed after we worked together doing that. And as after the kids came along in middle school for a few weeks, there was a lot. We used pass off system. And I was kind of skeptical about pass off system because that was not something I had done when I student taught. I just didn't think kids would buy into that, but they go nuts for the checks and passing off, and they'll line up and do it over and over. And, sometimes they get a half a check or, they got, maybe they had a good sound, but they didn't tongue well. And, they'll just go back in a circle and line up and keep doing it. And some of those days we were doing pass offs, it was really great. But Rodney always had a good plan, just an innate ability to know when it was time to differentiate and do something different with the kids. And I remember one fall we were teaching together, and all the clarinets and flutes. Well, actually, I think that time it was all the clarinets for some reason. It could have been the flutes too, but anyway, he had them all sitting down in the auditorium in the front row, and he said, "Before you get your stuff out, come in here and sit down." And it was talk time with Mr. Workman, and he gave him a big pep talk, and he said, "Now, some of you need some more help, and I'm going to take some of you outside to give you more support. And Mr. Daugherty's going to work with the rest of you." And so he called off about 30 or 40 names, and they're going outside. And then I have a group left of me, about 4 or 5. And outside we hear do, 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 do. And then one of my kids, who's still, figuring things out about which end of the clarinet ought to go on what side, raises her hand and says, "We're not the good ones, are we?" But now, he never told the kids that, but and I was able to help that group that needed help, and it worked really well. But I always remember that story just because it just kind of shows, kids kind of know where they are without being told. And there was no emphasis on them not doing well, but that kind of differentiation is really important when you're able to target those kids that need the most support. And I'm so thankful for that.
Does anybody have a question? Tracy has a question. Tracy, why don't you unmute and just ask?
Thank you, because I typed slow. I got bumped off, so I may have missed this, but when do you start looking at switching kids to color instruments, and how do you go about deciding who should play what?
Well, I think it's different really it's different for every setup. When I taught at East Fork Middle School, we had an A-Day, B-Day schedule, 45 minutes. So every class I had was an instrument class pretty much. And so it wasn't hard for me to start tubas like on day one, because I had a low brass class where everybody read bass clef and they could hear the pitches and I could play with them. And it was, and it wasn't hard to switch, even start clarinet and sax in the same room if I wanted. I never have wanted to do that, but it wouldn't have been difficult. So I started much earlier. I mean, I would start oboes and bassoons there like the first month of school. In Davidson County, it was a woodwind and a brass class split up, and so it was a little harder. So I would wait till November, December, January. I would try to get some kids switched for the first concert, but sometimes I would wait till after, depending on where they were. But then at Asheville, the method has been to wait until I think they go into 7th grade. I think that's too late, but then again, I have good tuba players and some really good horn players in the band at the high school. So I don't knock the system. I mean, maybe it works. Maybe it has worked best there to do it that way. I don't know. I just like doing it earlier because I feel like that time reading through the method book is super important, especially for like tuba players. If they get handed a tuba in 7th grade and then everybody else is already playing grade 2 music, that is a lot harder to catch up and to figure out. And I was one of those kids that switched in 8th grade. So I've always been really sensitive to that. Like that, I don't feel like they learn to read as well if they don't get to go through the beginner book like everybody else, and with at least partially through 6th grade. So that's my sort of reasoning for wanting to do it early. But I guess at the end of the day, it depends on the class setup and just picking the right kid, no matter when it is.
Now you also like you were already identifying kids you wanted to switch pretty early, right? I think you ought to share like how you were identifying kids that you thought were going to be good candidates to do other things.
Well, there was some drama about this from the Texas clinic a few months ago about the bassoon thing. And I agreed with some of that, but I will say for bassoon, I mean, like I always look for a kid that, okay, this kid's pretty smart. And I looked for a kid that didn't sound very good on clarinet, but they had great fingers. That was always sort of Central Davidson turned into a bassoon factory, so it must have worked. I mean, I tried to find somebody that seemed like they were really a tinkerer and they would enjoy just figuring out how to play something really hard, but maybe they weren't the star clarinet. Of all things, protecting the clarinet section is the most important. And that's something that's gone wrong for us in actual city schools. I only have 9 clarinets in the high school band this year, and I have 19 saxophones, not enough bassoons, not enough bass clarinets, and not enough oboes. We've not protected clarinet numbers here the way it should have been done, and we're suffering the consequence. I'm suffering the consequences of it, I should say. And that's important to, no matter who switches, I feel like protecting the clarinet section is super important. So I never wanted to switch like the top clarinet to oboe or bassoon necessarily, but I wanted to find somebody that I thought they would take off on that, and maybe they weren't going to be a star on clarinet or something. And same thing with horn and tuba. I think that's how I got picked to play the tuba. I sit next to a kid whose dad was the orchestra teacher at Hickory High, and his mom was a music teacher, and I was never going to be as good at trombone as him. And I think my band director realized that probably was going to drive me nuts, and he wanted somebody good to play the tuba, and so that's how I got put on the tuba. So I feel like it's important sometimes when to find the thing that a kid's going to really excel at and stick with, and that's different for every kid. But for me, it was just important to identify that pretty early and get them on something they would really stick to and get going on.
Well, slightly off topic of that, but very similar, kind of going back a little bit to recruiting. I remember Rodney working really hard to talk to 5th grade teachers for kids coming into 6th grade. And he very, very carefully tried to identify AIG kids and really smart kids that academically, I think in some ways he was already looking at kids that were going to play color instruments even before they ever got there, because he was constantly talking to those teachers and encouraging them to sign up for band before. And Rodney's a master recruiter. He could do a whole session just on recruiting himself, but that was critical. And a lot of those kids wound up, as you might guess, to the top of the sections wherever they started. And I'm sure some of those kids wound up bassoon and oboe and other horn, things like that.
And you can't just teach all AIG kids, of course. But I will say, I mean, if you're just being honest about it, those kids help the other kids that maybe aren't as fast if they're in the class with them. In a math class, if they're tracking, which goes in and out of style, they may not be in a math class with other kids that are not AIG or whatever. So in a band class, you have kids of all types of levels. And if you can figure out a system where those kids who are excelling super, super quick are there to help the others and kind of, get them going as well, that's really good. I mean, I do feel like band directors sometimes try to recruit only AIG kids, and then it's like, oh, well, the rest, who cares? Especially at a Title I school like Central Davidson, you cannot have that attitude or you won't have much of a band. But it is, I mean, obviously, it's important to also, you do have to have kids that are going to be able to be really successful really quickly, and that's going to help the whole program top to bottom, hopefully. But
well, you also recruited kids. You recruited some kids that had a lower socioeconomic background too, like for some background instruments, particularly kids you knew that would stay and be committed because they were appreciative to have an opportunity to play an instrument. And, and I know you shared about several stories about that as well. But, and I also know and remember, at first, I thought, well, gosh, if you move your number 2, 3, or 4 clarinet or star clarinet or flute onto something else. And I remember Rodney saying, yeah, but as smart as they are, as well as they progressed, they're going to pick up another instrument, and those kids further down the line are going to fill in where they were, and the kids that switch are going to grow at a faster pace. So they'll all be on the same place in a few weeks anyway. And that was really true. It was amazing how that all worked out. By Christmas, most all the kids were on the same page, even though some of them started a new instrument maybe 4-6 weeks into school.
Yeah, it's true.
What do y'all do when you have a student who change instruments? Did they ever change their minds, and what you do to combat that?
Well, Mr. Clark, was my tuba teacher, and James is tuba teacher as well. He told me a story one time about Joseph Robinson, the New York Harmonic, and how he ended up on the oboe at Lenore High School. And the story was basically that he was asked to play the oboe, and he said, "No, I really enjoy playing the saxophone. I don't want to switch from that." And so then the woodwind teacher basically gave him the cold shoulder for a few weeks and wouldn't teach his lessons and really just coerced him into switching to the oboe, and then the rest is history. I'm not advocating being ugly to a kid, but you do have influence as the band director. And a lot of times, a kid's gonna, if they feel like if you make it seem like it's important to the band and important to you, it's going to be important to them. It just is. Now, and if a kid's miserable, I mean, that's a different story. I have had some kids, switch to something, and then, one of my best horn players ever played the euphonium first, and he came to me at Christmas of 6th grade, and I hate the euphonium, it's boring. I think I want to quit. And I was like, well, what's the real issue here? And basically he said, well, it's boring. I'm not challenged. And I was like, well, let's give you a challenge and let's put you on the French horn. And then he ended up majoring in music. I want kids to be happy, but at the end of the day, you can't just let them switch around all the time either. And, you do have a lot of power as the band director. Most kids are eager to please that person.
Well, we had a kid, Rodney started, and then I taught in high school, and he was an okay trombone player, but didn't have the best sound. And I guess when I switched into the job I'm in now, Rodney let him play clarinet, and he wound up making all set on clarinet in high school.
Yes, and he's majored in music now. He taught my clarinets last week at band camp. That was one I always kind of think, well, maybe I should have let him switch to clarinet earlier. But he was a good trombone player, and you never want to let go of trombones. And at the time, I had just rows of clarinet players. So, but the kid made all national band on bass clarinet before I ever let him switch. So I guess that was finally when I was like, well, okay, fine, you can play the clarinet some. But it's always a balance between keeping the kid happy and doing what's best for the band.
Y'all, we have a third guest on our panel. Tippy was adding to the conversations. James, you want to introduce Tippy?
Yeah, I'll get him over here in a minute. This might be Sean. He chimes in every now and then. There's a neighbor cat that comes to the back door and likes to sit there to aggravate him.
Does somebody else have a question about recruiting or, Tracy, she'd love to know all your secrets on recruiting.
Well, I don't know how to, it's for me, recruiting is every day of my life. Like if I see any kid anywhere that I think, why is that kid not in the band? It really irritates me. I mean, if we had 500 kids in the band, that would be fine with me. I just feel like the more the merrier, and the more long-term that produces goodwill in the community. And for me, numbers have always been important. You can do more with kids, with numbers, and no matter what the size of the school, I mean, it's the percentage really that counts. And I do think it's a little shameful that, in high schools, if we're at 6, 7, 8% in a high school band, that's very normal right now. That shouldn't be that way. But, you only can teach it in 9th grade. So for high school directors, who's coming to 6th is most important. So for me, even when I taught at the high school, I felt like that the whole program, it was our responsibility to recruit a lot. And so I feel like going out in elementary schools, more than just when you're recruiting in March, is really important. If you can get out there. I mean, some people's schedules aren't as free. Mine's always been pretty flexible, or I forced it to be, so that I could spend time out there. And then I think there's nothing that takes the place of a recruiting concert. And a lot of people take the middle school bands out. At Central Davidson, we took the high school wind ensemble out because they could easily throw together a concert of 10 to 12 grade 2 pop tunes and Star Wars and whatever within a rehearsal. In fact, it was one rehearsal. We had folders we used for it. And it was, you have this day to learn these 12 tunes and we're going to play on the concerts. And they just sounded so good and looked so good. And it really made the program look the way it needed to look. And then it got the kids in the band that, we really needed to get in there. So feel like a recruitment concert is a huge, huge deal. But when you go do them, it has to be fun and the kids have to look. I really paid a lot of attention to how the kids dressed for that concert. Like, I made sure they won't come in looking sloppy, and I made sure to really show off the athletes in the band, especially because that's always been important to me, that we don't tend to get a lot of athletes in the band programs just nationally, and we should and could. So, I don't know, that's sort of the short answer. Does that answer any of it, Tracy?
It's also manipulation and Vulcan mind melds from Mr. Workman. But
Well, I mean, as a band director, my stepdad is like, runs a company, and we've had a lot of conversations about how it's really the same thing. You're the CEO of the little company, and it's your job to sell a product all the time. And so I feel like a really good salesman all the time, because you have to be, or otherwise, no other teacher has to do that. Math teachers don't care who takes math class. If somebody doesn't take AP calculus, whatever, it's one less kid to have to deal with for them. But for us, it's different. So I just feel like every day of my life is constantly recruiting and getting and retaining kids.
I can show an example of that. I've got a little clip pulled up on my phone. I'm going to see. Yeah, I think we can show it here. I'll push play.
What is this up?
It's a recruiting concert. Let me go back. Davis Townsend. So obviously the whole point there was to get kids to want to play the trombone, and he put all the trombones up front, and you saw that little boy just moving and dancing. And I don't know if he played trombone, but there sure were probably several that did, because they loved hearing the trombone mambo.
And trombone mambo is grade 0.7. So if a high school wind ensemble can't sight read trombone mambo in one rehearsal, they need to have some remediation. So, we didn't do anything. I would supplement that concert with stuff from our spring concert too. So we might do 2 grade 1 pieces and a grade 1.5, and then we'd play Candide or something as well. So there was sometimes some hard music in there, but it was stuff we were already working on. But the recruitment part of it was just a bunch of fun middle school music that was really 6th and 7th grade level. So that it would sound really good. And, middle school kids or elementary kids don't know if it's grade 1 or grade 6, really. So I feel like that concert was really where we went to the next level recruiting wise in Lexington. There's the doggy.
Here's the doggy. Say hello, Tippy. Yes, Tippy's going to conduct one day in Bichon orchestras.
So I would think with all that recruiting, you guys had to have really good relationships with your administrators. Do you have any tips or ideas for creating and maintaining those relationships with your administrators?
I do, but since James is the administrator, I think he should go first.
Well, I think the number one most important thing, particularly at high school, we talked a lot about middle school tonight, but relationships with administrators are important at all levels. But I think often high school band directors maybe misunderstand that relationship piece that they've got to have with administrators, and particularly with counselors, and understanding what kids have to do outside of band. I'm going to put a link in the chat that's a sample schedule this is for the class of 2025, assuming the social studies standards stay in. And this is something that evolved years ago when I sat down with one of my principals and said, look, I'm getting a lot of kids that say they can't stay in band, and they say it's from scheduling, and I really don't want to lose them, and this was a great principal. And he said, well, here's a piece of paper, let's just kind of map it out. And he wrote and started building these blocks and wrote out what kids would have to take. And it intrigued me so much that I went back and typed it up. And from that point forward, we've used this and we've given it to kids. And then Rodney, when we were working together, he would give it to 8th graders and that were going to be in high school. And he would pretty much say, you don't even need to worry about where you're going to take, just follow this. And even parents were very thankful to have it, because they could just plan what they were going to take based on that, and it would get them into any 4-year school, and things worked well. And but what happened for me is, if kids said, oh, well, I can't take this because I got to take this year. I understood the scheduling process and what had to be taken by the UNC system, that I could say, well, you could do this year, or you could do this on NCVPS, or you could do this way. And it was right. So there was really no argument about why they couldn't take band. It's sad, but it's true in high school. And then Rodney, I'm sure, followed after me and had some of this. You've got to really be on top of what's going on outside of the band room in high school, because it's easy for kids to get attention drawn away from band and snatched up by other things. You can cohabitate well, but you always have to be the master of the most knowledge about what's going on outside the band room, because if you're not, they're going to get lured away, especially the really inquisitive kids that can do a lot of things. Unfortunately, the very best kids are often preyed upon to do everything in the school, and they can't do everything. So at some point, they've got to make decisions, and you just want being in band to be one of their priority points. And I think that when your administration values the band and they see the value the band brings to the school community and the school climate, that's easy to do. This could be another conversation too, but seeing how the band fits into the school climate, and I'm kind of going to speak to marching band a little bit, as when Rodney came at Central, we were still competing, and that was going fine. And we put more money into it and tried to make that go even better. But I think the kids that we taught, we tapped out their interest in marching band, and we shifted because we wanted to get them more attention on their playing. And we started putting some of that money into private lessons and, well, master classes, not private lessons. But what we found is that we were able to pull back with the marching band some, and we were able to do more things at football games, and the student section became really interested in the drum line. And then there became this really happy peace among the band and the students. And well, it didn't hurt that the football team was not very successful either. So they wanted to have something they were grasping onto to enjoy, and felt the success. But, so your administrators are always really happy when there's something that's going well in school, and they can talk about that to everybody else. And so I think that at high school, that's one of the biggest reasons to build those relationships and to constantly be in communication with administrators. I know Rodney can speak to that probably more than I can at middle school.
I think the only thing I would add to that is just don't bother them very much. I mean, they're really busy, and no principal, no matter who they are, likes to get bothered with little things. So I try to save any problem. If I go to them, it's going to be something that only they can solve. Or I might just in the hall and casually mention something if it's a small thing, but I try not to ever email them with stuff that's mundane. And then the other thing that I learned from James, I learned the kinder part of this from James, and then I added the less kind part, is basically praising them a lot in public at concerts. And I've always done that, and made sure to thank them for anything they do for the band publicly and with parents, and make sure that they are recognition they deserve. On the other end of that, though, I always like to make sure they understand that it cuts both ways, and you're not going to get away with not supporting the program and then continue having me publicly praise you. So I always felt like my principals knew that this person has a microphone in front of hundreds of parents and isn't always afraid to use it. And I never really had to very much, but occasionally, you'd have to throw a little something in if there was a big issue getting ready to pop up. And not almost always, the principals are always supportive and helped us with any problem we might be having. But, I always use that as the last resort. But I like them to know, for me personally, that I do appreciate the administration, but I'm also not going to let them run over me. And I do expect them to give support to the program, meaningful support.
We've got a question in the chat box. Since we are still in the midst of COVID, but trying to have a normal school year, what are you doing differently at the start of the year this year?
We're lucky to have 2 rehearsal spaces and 2 band directors. So, I mean, we're split women brass when we're inside, so that we're very spread out. We're much more serious about COVID on the mountain than the rest of the state, clearly. We did not really ever even come back last year. And so we're getting to come back in the fall full time, but I worry it ain't gonna last long. So we're trying everything possible to make sure that if there's a cluster, that it doesn't take out half the band. Cause I have 125 in one class. So that would take out the whole school if something big happened in there. And the principals and I have talked about that. So we're at least 6 feet apart. We're doing the bell cover, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing basically. I have seen no band camp pictures, and I have talked to band directors that are just like, yeah, we're still doing whatever. It's like a normal year. I think that's not going to be the case within a few weeks. It's already blowing up in places. So we're just trying to treat it like we did last, March.
Oh, and I would add to that from like an administrative, like district level person right now. One thing that I'm doing is very carefully demonstrating enrollment numbers to the administrative folks at the district level, because I want them to be aware if they don't continue to add support behind recruiting efforts and middle school efforts to maintain programs, it's going to be devastating for high schools in just a couple of years down the road. So Rodney told me something one time that I had never really thought of, but as I go through numbers in Davidson County, it's almost 100% accurate, is that your typical high school band is about the same size as middle school 7th grade. So if your middle school 7th grade has 50 in it, then you probably have 50 in the total high school program. If you've got close to 100, I mean, it's going to sway some either way, but it's really close in most of our schools. And now, if I misquoted you, Rodney, tell me, but I'm pretty sure it was something close to that you told me one time.
I had 7th and 8th grade together, and it's frighteningly similar. If there's 3 bassoons in 7th and 8th grade, there's 3 in the high school, down to just with 1 or 2 differences. And that is something I keep a really close eye on. Dave Albert taught me to keep a chart of what everybody plays in every grade, 6 through 12, and keep up with who's coming and what's happening. And I still do that very carefully, even now, especially.
Well, and you shared that with me with middle school, and that's one thing that we did a lot together. Is we had a shared Dropbox, and we shared all kinds of files and folders, but we had this like massive spreadsheet that we worked from. And like from the middle school experience, when I was working with 6th graders, we would go through and kind of rank where they were, not rank them 1 to 14, but are they like 1s or 2s or 3s? So you knew which ones needed more attention, and that might shift every week or two. But even in high school, we were sharing information about what was going on there. So we were both seeing numbers and looking at things and co-tracking that with each other. I do wonder, because I don't know, but I do wonder how other programs that work together kind of track and go through information. And, there's some incredibly talented musicians that are teaching band, and there's some really organized people teaching band, but that balance between both of those things really important. The organization and the office aspect and the paperwork and the talking to parents and the communicating. And as Rodney said, the dealing with administration and the praising and the things that go on with that, but and just being a good musician and band director too. I mean, you got to have a balance of both of those things for sure.
There's 2 questions that are about SEL and about remediating this year. And that is, I imagine Charlotte is the same for Michael Sanders and some of the other city school systems, but we did come back for 16 days last year, and it was such a restrictive, crazy plan that high school kids didn't come back. So there's tons of kids in our band that came to band camp we haven't seen since the pandemic started at all, or they're middle school kids, of which we didn't see any. They had 16 in-person class days last year, and out of those, not all the kids even came back. And so we are massively behind. I mean, in Asheville, to say we're remediating is not even close. The middle school camp, it was basically just a beginning camp. So our priority, basically, we have 3 big goals that I've published and talked to the parents about, and our goals are just to have fun. And within that is the social emotional stuff. And we even talked about that with the parents. And I sort of prepped the parents for, they're probably going to come home and some of them are going to talk about quitting, or they're going to talk about their stress, because after sitting at home for more than a year, to come back and be thrown into these giant classes and to not have the musical skills to be successful, it is stressful for them. So we headed off any band camp losses from that. I think we had two kids who did quit, but one of them never came to camp at all, and one of them came for a day. But then we had 2 kids move in, so it evened out, it was fine. But that was it. So the SEL stuff is really important this year, I think, and the parents really like that. When we talked about that in the parent meeting, they said they agree that the kids are socially messed up right now and that it's really important for them to get back in the normal swing of things. The other part, our second goal is just to rebuild the playing skills, which are massively destroyed right now. So for marching band, I mean, even on a good year, I couldn't care less about a trophy. I mean, I don't even care if we compete. And if we do, I don't really care about that part of it. So for me, I just want the kids to get in marching band and have a good time and to learn to read better through it. So I play tons of stance tunes to force the reading. We will sometimes have 20 plus stance tunes in our folder, as opposed to just doing a show for 6 minutes all the time, because I feel like that marching band can be really, really good for the reading aspect. And right now, reading is what is so diminished because they haven't done any kind of full ensemble reading in so long. So I feel like our kids, because we did private lessons through the pandemic, are actually technically maybe better off than some, but ensemble wise, they've not played in anything since March of 2020. So we just spent a lot of time at camp playing full band music, trying to play fun music and playing some easier music so we could get through it quicker and just build reading skills. And we did the same thing at the beginner or the 7th and 8th grade camp. We did beginner band music with 7th and 8th graders. We didn't beat it into them all week. We just spent about 40 minutes, 50 minutes each day reading songs. And the rest of the day we spent just rebuilding skills. But it's always a balance between, if you're truly rebuilding skills the way you need to, you're going to bore them to death and they're going to want to quit. And so we've been trying to find the balance between playing, music with them and rebuilding skills, because they definitely are way behind. And I'm sure everybody's kids are behind. Does that answer that?
He gave you a thumbs up.
Yeah.
But I am worried about it. I mean, we're just, everybody's behind, but like still, you don't, when you come in and the 9th graders really don't play a lot of scales, so they can't, for me right now, our priority is just having a good time and keeping the numbers up. The fact we have 125 kids in marching band is a freaking miracle. So I don't even care how they play right now. I just am glad they're there and want to keep them, no matter how bad they play. And some of them play pretty badly.
At this point, with the Delta variant making its way through, are you prepared to teach in different scenarios again? Or are you just taking it one day at a time?
Am I emotionally prepared or am I actually prepared? No, I mean, no to either, really. I may have a meltdown if we go back into plan B or something. And I feel like we probably are. So, but I know I'm not prepared. I don't know. It was, since we never got back, I feel like for us, it'll be even more destructive. But I am hoping that because our kids are extremely highly vaccinated and are extremely happy to wear a mask, we may end up doing better than the schools last year that really came back a lot. That seems to be worth blowing up right now, but we'll see. But no, I'm not prepared at all. We'll see.
Brent Davis has a question. Brent, go ahead.
Hey guys, thank you very much for doing this. So yeah, let's say hypothetically everything goes and we actually go, we're back in person for the majority of the time. I'm already starting to think about fundraising. I know that's a weird word to say in all of this, but have you guys, talked about that? Have you figured out something that maybe that you think would be working in this kind of environment? What works for you, I guess, for fundraising? Because right now I am wrapping my brains around it, and there's only certain things that could work in this time, so I'm just wondering if you have any ideas on that too.
I think anything online is going to be better. And even the fruit sale can be online. It had gotten for us in Lexington to be where a lot of it was online, but yeah, the pickup and stuff is kind of hard. And I don't know. We actually haven't had a fundraiser, I don't think, since before the pandemic. So, but we're going to have to this year because we're poor right now. So I don't know. That is going to be a problem. But hopefully if it can be a contactless kind of pickup thing, I mean, even a fruit sale or cookie dough or whatever can happen, but I don't know. What do you think, Mr. Rodney?
Well, I'm thinking about one of the biggest fundraisers that we did before you left was this mattress fundraiser that a lot of people do, and that was still bizarre to me how that ever was a great fundraiser, but it was. And that could probably be made to work in most buildings that are allowing people to come into the building on a Saturday. You might have to limit how many people come in or shop or that kind of thing, but that involves, a lot of the materials for that are just kids getting contacts. So that could be done online and social media and stuff like that. There may be some of these companies that do fundraising that I would not be surprised if some of the companies that have been doing a lot of fundraising have quickly started transitioning to online orders and don't present some of that to you this fall about sharing things with your kids to send home that way. So if they don't ask you that, I'd ask some of them, say, look, my kids can't go out and go door to door. So what have you got that we can share with parents and they can share with people at work? And then beyond that, help me understand how we're going to get it in their hands if it's something that they got to pick up, because, you can't have 100 people coming in here picking up stuff. So that's great points, Brent. And, another fundraiser that I remember happening that people did some of these just basically, make a flat donation somehow. So some of that may work, and maybe going back to some of those old school things like, magazines, maybe it's digital subscriptions now. Those are great questions, and I actually haven't heard much about that being discussed in like the music association circles either, but that's a good thought. I may ask that question with one of our national executive board meetings. If there's all kinds of partners within AFME that work together, so I'll bring that up and see if any of them have reached out to speak that way about it. But that's good. And don't forget, to ask your school too about, is there ESSER money that can be used to help support the band? And even though schools may have already got a plan this year to use ESSER money, there's still another year that they're going to get money that they haven't even planned for yet. And there's millions of dollars coming to school systems through that. And as typical, school districts tend to like to play that card close to the vest, and they don't let a lot of that information out about, what they're spending and, and the Title IV money that I've been a big advocate for since I've been in this job. Well, if you got all this ESSER money, then you probably don't need to be doing as much with Title IV. So then, if they say, we don't have any ESSER money, well, then go back and ask about Title IV. So, there's some other ways to get money without having to go out and send kids. And I would certainly sit down with my administration and say, look, you don't want me sending my band kids out to ask people door to door, we're in a pandemic. So how can you help support the program in a way that you typically would not, but that you could right now?
Thank you very much. That was good points. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
James, in the chat, we have a question about the deadline of August 1st, but nobody around Tracy seems to know anything about ESSER. Are there other opportunities to request funding?
Yeah, Tracy, there's going to be other ways to do that and make that work. What I recommend to you is find out who the federal programs coordinator is, and you're in Union County, right? Yeah, so find out who that is for Union County schools. And I might mention it to your principal to say, do you mind if I talk to the federal programs coordinator just to ask some questions? Typically, they don't care. They've got enough on their plate right now anyway, so they'd rather you ask than them, I'm sure. But I would just say, hey, I know that ESSER money can be used for a lot of different things, and Title IV, can you use some support in helping that plan, or can you tell me about how the arts are in that plan, or could I work with you to help get the arts for your next deadline? The way all this federal money works, there's something called the CCIP, which is the it's basically like the school improvement plan for federal money that has to be sent to Raleigh, and they have to write a narrative in there about what they're going to do. And even for ESSER, they're having to do that. But if you can help develop some kind of survey, particularly if it's system wide, about needs and things like that, some kind of needs survey, and you can collect some data about why things are important. When you have data, then you're golden, and you can do about anything with federal money. Essentially, you want to write the questions so that the answers always show that you need it. Like if you need tubas, then, you say to the middle school and high school band directors, do you have enough school-owned tubas so that no one has to share instruments during a pandemic? And of course, everyone's going to say no for the most part. So then you got a data point that says 90% of our schools do not have enough tubas so that no one shares instruments. And everybody says, oh my gosh, that's not sanitary, and so they want to support that because that's a critical health need. And going back kind of to Brent's question, that's another approach you might take with administrators, Brent, if, because obviously you don't need fundraising dollars now to travel like you may have, but if you never did have enough bass clarinets for the band, right now is your golden time to try to get those because nobody wants children sharing instruments. So, for all the bad things about the pandemic, this may be the one place where we can all get a lot more than we ever thought.
In the chat box, Anna said, my admin told me to make requests again in January when principals start working on their budgets.
Yeah.
Be good.
It's a good point, Anna. And I would say what you don't know, some of the little secrets about federal money is that all those plans have to be written and finished sometime between May and June. So no matter what date you're given, every school system in North Carolina has to turn that stuff in June. So asking right now may not get you very far, but after Christmas, that's a good time to start getting into things. And that's a good point, Brent, about daily equipment, reeds and valve oil. Now, some people might get that from the school system and then, resell it, but you probably have to be careful about doing that because you might create your own fundraiser, but you know your people, how you can do that. But that is true. Especially for anything that would help maintain safety and health of kids, Mr. Workman, you should tell everybody about the vending machine you had in the middle school.
Well, I won't say how it was funded, but you did let on to that, I guess. But
well, I wasn't doing it for that. I mean, just the whole idea of the vending machine I thought was brilliant.
Well, I think there was a question about how to prepare for school, or or at least in the things we were saying or whatever. But I just always try to do things that are going to speed things up for me and not have me bogged down constantly fixing instruments and selling reeds and whatever. And so I don't know where I got the idea for the vending machine. I think I saw somebody with one or somebody had said something about it or whatever. But I found a vending machine company in Charlotte that changed the receptor thing to taking 20s, and then we replaced the coils where they would fit reed boxes and bigger things, and it was certainly easy. There was never any excuse of you didn't have what you needed because it was back there. So and Ted Driver was really, really good at keeping it stock. I mean, he would just kept kind of look at it and, hey, you need more 3.5s for saxes, I'll bring them next week. Okay, great. So it was the music center stocked it, and it sold it. The best time it sold was at all district auditions. All the other kids seemed to novelty buy stuff out of the machine. So
how much was that vending machine? I forgot. Do you remember?
It was like $1,200, I think, and then it was like another $200 for the selector. I think I may have spent $1,500 total, which is a lot of money, but you overcharged a little bit for everything to the point that it paid for itself eventually.
And we would even send high school kids down there a lot of times, after school or something, and they would come buy some of their stuff out of there too. So that was, and we didn't have to count money or, put it in your pocket or whatever, because you know how that is. Kid gives you $2 for a reed and either it gets, you don't, I mean, everybody knows how that goes.
Bow ties out of it.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, 6th grade bow ties for concert attire. They were in the vending machine. I remember distinctly one concert at Christmas seeing 3 different sets of parents go in there and get a bow tie for their children out of that machine before the concert.
Well, gentlemen, we need to start wrapping up, but I did have one question for Rodney. What is the funniest student story you can share from your days teaching middle school?
I try to think of something, but most of mine are very inappropriate that are funny, so I don't know that I can say them here. So especially middle school, but I don't know. Mr. Daugherty probably told the funniest story before, but there was, I, like all people, you put your percussionist sometimes where out of sight and out of mind. And I put at Central, there was no band room. Middle, that was just the auditorium, and it was an old, terrible auditorium. And on the sides were these dressing rooms is what they were originally, I guess. And they were our offices and practice rooms or whatever. But for whatever reason, inside of those things, there were sinks. And we didn't really ever use the sinks, but they still worked. And anyway, I put the percussionist in there one day. And I don't remember if they did something to cause it or if it just happened. But for whatever reason, one of them came, Dawson, this little boy named Dawson, who I called Destroyer from then on, until the time he basically graduated, which was just this last year. He come running out of the room, and I was like with a bunch of clarinets doing something and covered in water, like having an emotional meltdown. I was like, what is going on? He was like, there's water going everywhere. And so I don't know if you were there that day, Mr. Doherty, or not, but I then go up, and somehow those percussionists had ripped the faucet off, like the thing that you turn to turn the water on. It had blown off, and there was just water like a fire hydrant spewing as much as humanly possible everywhere you could think of. So the room was already flooded by the time I got up there, and these percussionists are like scared to death I'm going to kill them, and covered in water. And so then I like go to the office. They can't find the water key. The water key is missing, so they can't get the water turned off. So the water just flows for like 45 minutes of just water. It flooded the whole end of the school. It goes everywhere. It destroyed that room. There's water in the hall. So the moral of that story was, don't leave the percussionist unattended in practice rooms, I learned, and was what it was. But there's a million things like that in middle school. Of course it happened. The best one though, I'll have to tell when we're not on camera.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Your words of wisdom are wonderful. We hope everybody has a great start to their school year, and please know that we will answer questions, help you any way we can. And I'd like to say that we have episode 2 with D'Amica Kempson and Michael Sanders, and that will be September 26th at 6:30. So I hope you all will make it back. Thank you so much, everyone.